Welcome to Haunting History, the podcast that reaches back into the past for the events that still haunt us today. Tales of true crime, mystery, and the macabre. And when we're lucky, the stories where history and the people who lived it and the paranormal meet. Now, who doesn't love a good ghost story, right? Welcome back to Haunting History Podcast. I'm your host, Kat. And today I'm excited because one of my personal fascinations is lighthouses. I love lighthouses. I don't know if it's the romance of a lighthouse or the thought of an old ship captain, or maybe because I, as a kid, would watch old black and white episodes of The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. And even though it wasn't at a lighthouse, it was all about being on the sea and the captain who was the ghost. And I've always been fascinated by lighthouses. I think that they're romantic and spooky. And I'm lucky today to talk to Carol O'Neill from Point Sur Light Station. My first question, and this might be a stupid question, what is the difference between a light station and a lighthouse?
It's not a stupid question. We get it all the time.
Okay.
A lighthouse is the actual building that the light is on. And a light station is that building, the lighthouse, and all the buildings that support it. So at Point Sur, we have 2 keepers' quarters. One is a giant building with 3 apartments. The other is just a standalone house. We have a barn. We have a carpenter shop, and a couple of other small buildings. So light stations are the whole complex.
So it's still a lighthouse.
Oh, yeah.
Then.
And we have a very nice lighthouse.
Tell me a little bit of the history. When was the actual lighthouse built?
The lighthouse was built in 1889, and that was just to set it in context. It's along the Big Sur coast, and in 1889 there was no highway, there was no actual road. There was kind of a rough road to Big Sur, but today, of course, we have Highway 1, which is the scenic highway that runs along the coast. But in 1889, it was quite remote.
And when it was built because of the rocky coastline right there, right?
Absolutely. Lighthouses are more than just warning devices. Though, because Point Sur is a big rock that kind of sticks out into the ocean, we're connected to the shore by a huge sand area, but we're about a half a mile from Highway 1. So when you go up and down the coast, you actually have to go around Point Sur. But more than that, lighthouses are actually aids to navigation. They tell the mariner where to change his or her course. So if you're coming up the coast from Southern California and you get to Point Sur, you'll want to change your course more northerly. Otherwise, you'll...
To go around it?
Yeah, well, no, assuming you're going to go around it, but you want to, if you're coming up the coast and you don't change your course, you're going to keep going out to sea. So the California coast isn't, just north-south. So you have to make a jog, I'll say, to the right, to the north, or the more northeasterly direction, I guess. Otherwise, you go past Monterey and San Francisco, you'd never see it. And it's really obvious coming up the coast of San Francisco, or the coast of California, at Point Conception, which is just north of Santa Barbara. So the coast kind of goes east-west, and then you have to turn to go north.
And what do you do? What is your title?
My title, I'm the volunteer historian.
Oh, so you know all the juicy history.
I do.
And so every lighthouse that I've researched prior to this was, it was always one family or one man that lived at the light station. But for whatever reason, Point Sur had 2 or 3 at a time, right?
Yes. They generally had 4 light keepers.
And why is that? Why did they have so many there?
I think because it was so remote. There was a head keeper and then 3 assistant keepers, and most of them had families. But I don't actually know. I'm guessing because it was remote.
Because that's not normal, right?
Well, I'm trying to think. Point Pinos, which is our nearest other lighthouse, is located in the town of Pacific Grove on the Monterey Peninsula, and they usually had 1 keeper.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
most that I've looked at have been like that.
yeah. I think one of the reasons back in the old days, they only turned the light on at night. At Point Sur, they only turned the light on at night, but they also had a fog signal. So the light keepers had 4, 6, 8-hour watches. So they needed to, have the rotating watch, and then there was a lot of maintenance that went on, and then if anybody got sick or wasn't there. So even up into modern times, and I'll say into the early 70s, which is when the Coast Guard, I'll say, abandoned the light. They took the keepers away and remoted how it operated. But they also had 4 keepers.
Does the lighthouse still operate today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The same purpose, the same reason why it always
Yes, it does. And I'm going to put a little asterisk by the yes, it does. Right now, the solar panels that ran the Coast Guard's modern LED light, they blew off the solar panels. So right now we do not have a light. But we've been in touch with the Coast Guard Station Monterey, and they assured us as soon as they get something back, it is not being decommissioned. It's still an active aid to navigation.
That's interesting, because there isn't a lot of light stations that are still active, is there?
Yeah, a lot of them still are, but none of them have people living in them. I mean, unless it's like a bed and breakfast. But yeah, along our coast, we have Point Pinos and Pacific Grove, and then Piedras Blancas down in San Simeon and Cambria. And these are all, they've been there for over 100 years. Up north between Santa Cruz and San Francisco is Pigeon Point, and there's another one, Montera.
What year did they stop having people live there? 1974?
72. And we're pretty sure that's because that was the year the Clean Water Act went into law. And it's a rock, Point Sur is. And before the Clean Water Act was put into practice, they just sent it all out over the side, big pipes down to the ocean. And after that, it was just deemed too expensive to put in a sewage treatment. And they could, by 1972, they could remote it. And they were running the light 24/7. So it wasn't like somebody had to run down and flip the switch.
So tell us about the people that have lived there.
Well, it was, I was laughing as you talked about the Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which I loved also, and that very handsome sea captain. And but the reality is most of those people didn't have all their teeth.
Really?
Well, it was the olden times, and they smelled bad, and it wasn't like, I don't know who was in the very handsome guy in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, but I dare say none of them were that handsome. Having said that, they were, this was a government job, so it was sort of a middle-class job. It required some skill because back in the old days, you had to have some mechanical ability. During the Coast Guard era, of course, they were Coast Guardsmen, and they were usually had electrical backgrounds. So I don't know the Coast Guard's ratings, but they would have been electricians. But we had a blacksmith shop, so the people who were there would have needed to have those skills. They had to pass a test. They were middle.
And the benefit to them was that their family could live there too,
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's why you would take a job like that.
Yes. Now, there was no school most of the time. So families had very small children, and they would usually transfer to a lighthouse, light station that was closer to schools if the kids got to be around 6 years old. But in the late 20s, very early 30s in Monterey County, if you had 6 children that were 6 years old or older, you could get who were not 6 years old on paper became 6 years old. And for 2 or 3 years, they had their own teacher. And they were usually young, right out of college. And they didn't stay very long because they had to live with the families. And then in 1932, they had a school close by to the lighthouse, one room. Kids and schooling, it was always kind of an issue. By the 1930s, they had, and when the highway went in, the kids went to high school in Monterey. So
tell us about the individuals that lived there. Like, I heard there were interesting stories about the people that lived there, the different families.
There was one keeper that was at Point Sur for about 20 years, John Astrom, and he was Swedish. He had served 20 years with the Swedish, I think, Merchant Marine. He may have been in the Swedish Navy. And then he emigrated to the United States, and he put in another 20-some years with the lighthouse service. And he and his wife, Alice, he was the head keeper, lived at the light station. They had a son, Oscar, and as far as we know, Oscar is the only person that has died at Point Sur, and he died of tuberculosis in 1917.
How old was he?
He was just shy of 23. And
so he wasn't a small child.
No. But he was a small child when he came to Point Sur. Now, in the very early, one of the early head keepers was Frank Ingersoll, and he came to Point Sur with a wife and her sister, one or two sisters, and brother. And he and Mrs. Ingersoll went on to have 4 or 5 children. The brother-in-law married a local girl in Big Sur, became a light keeper, and then he went on to have a full career in the lighthouse service and retired in 1940-ish. And that was, Ingersoll came to Point Sur in 1890, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah, so people would, there were lighthouse families. I guess like there are naval families. It's just what they do, I guess.
Now, the haunting and legends of Point Sur, I saw an episode of Ghost Adventures, and you were on it.
Yes.
How was that?
It was fun.
Was it fun?
I wasn't there when they were filming when they were getting blue lights and other stuff.
The drama.
Yeah, I was up there during the day, and we always kind of laughed because Julie, who was also on that show, when she does her investigations, she gets as much stuff during the day. We don't have to be there at 3:00 in the morning. Apparently, yeah, and I always say it's because our light keepers are good, hardworking folk, early to bed, early to rise. But
so they're staying on their schedule.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't know.
He attributed during the TV show. I know that you had said that Oliver was the only one that had passed away actually at the light station, but he had attributed a lot of the paranormal stuff or things that had happened, the reports that people had given, to there were so many shipwrecks right there at Point Sur.
There were several shipwrecks, but there wasn't a lot of loss of life. And so there was one shipwreck in 1894, the Los Angeles, and 6 people were lost. But aside from that, I'm thinking in 1956, there was maybe 1 or 2 people lost on a shipwreck, but there weren't tons of shipwrecks.
Oh, there weren't. I
No.
thought there was something. I thought I had read that there were like a list of shipwrecks
Well, there
or
were
or something.
shipwrecks, but not everything that was in Ghost Adventures that they put out historically was true.
Okay,
Just
so
saying.
how many ghosts? How many? Shocking. How many shipwrecks were there in Point Sur?
Well, close by around Point Sur, there was the Ventura. That was before the lighthouse was even built. Los Angeles, the Howard Olson, and these are within a mile or two, and a submarine that went up on the rocks in 1915. And the only one of those that I know of that had any loss of life was the Los Angeles in 1894, and the Howard Olson, I think, may have had one or two fatalities, but I'm not even sure of that.
So there is a lot of stories of hauntings there.
Oh
Though.
yeah, well
What?
that's the conundrum. Where
Like what? Yeah, what is attributed to?
I have no idea. my,
Interesting.
my husband, theorized. He said maybe at the end of it all, you get to come back at the place and age you were happiest, because we do have a fair number of. Julie gets child recordings, and the first one I heard of hers, she came as a visitor on a moonlight tour and was actually standing by the porta potties, and she got on her, they're called EVPs, and honestly I don't know what that means. They're recording
Electronic voice phenomenon.
Thank you. And she said, oh, they've got a Norwegian accent or something. And I'm like, yeah, right, because half of the stuff you hear on TV I don't understand. And then she played it for me, and it was like, oh my gosh. It's a woman's voice saying, go to bed, smoky, pokey, something like that. And
oh yeah, I had a question about that, because I had read that it was pokey go to bed, and then on the TV show they were saying smoky go to bed.
Well, it was indistinct, and then you hear the little child's voice saying something like, okay, mama. But the woman's voice had a distinct Scandinavian accent, which was like, oh my gosh, you can actually hear these things. Now, when Julie got that, she was not she's a docent now, and was just, kind of a random visitor at the time, and didn't know much about Point Sur. And when we started to look into some of these, like so we didn't know what era this may have been, but when I started researching some of the keepers, and I'm going to go back to Ingersoll back in 1890, the woman he married had come from Denmark. And
so she would have had that accent.
She would have. And one of, okay, we now know that this woman came from Denmark. And then at one of our volunteer meetings, Julie talked to a volunteer who has since passed away, whose grandfather was the brother-in-law who spent many, many years with the lighthouse service and retired in, 1940 or so. So he knew the family. These were his aunts and uncles. And he said, oh, yes, one of the kids, and he volunteered this, had a nickname that was Pokey or Smoky or something that rhymed with that. And it was like, oh my gosh, there's no way Julie could have known that. I didn't know that. So,
and it's really clear.
It is.
That EVP is really clear.
It is. Have you heard it?
I heard it on TV.
Yeah, it is very clear. And which was,
well, it could just be, I'm wondering if, okay, so like your husband's theory is that you go back to the place that you're happiest, but didn't you say that Ingersolls, did they have 6 kids?
5 or 6, they had a bunch. I can't remember. It was a bunch.
Okay, so maybe it's just residual. Maybe it's just something that's playing over and over. Like it's not necessarily them haunting, quote unquote haunting. It could just be something that's imprinted on. Here's a theory. A lot of people talk about water being a conduit.
Okay.
for something like a residual haunting,
Yeah.
where it is just playing over and over again. And that kind of is a lot of what Julie had gotten. Didn't sound like actual interactions, like where they call it an intelligent haunting, where she would say something, they would say something back. It seemed like a lot of the EVPs she had were sort of like a loop playing over and over again.
I don't know.
Because what was the other one? She got another one where someone said, "You liar, you kissed
Oh yeah,
her."
that's another good one.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, I want to hear that story.
And I don't know where that came from. We have in our mind how people lived, but the light station was a small town. There were 4 families. And I don't know if there was hanky panky, don't know about visitors, just don't know. And there's one of the things that with the ghost adventures is I felt kind of like they were trying to manipulate some major trauma, a big shipwreck, but
Right.
nothing really happened there. There was no real trauma. I mean, you have your individual traumas of everyday life, but
Right, of losing even the 23-year-old who lost his
yeah,
life
and
had to be
that's as
devastating
far
for his
as we know,
parents.
that's the only person that's died there. But there weren't huge storms where people died. There wasn't.
Or
Yeah, there
tragedies.
weren't big crimes with knives, and there just wasn't any of that. It was
So
it
maybe,
was a government job.
and maybe it is what I'm thinking, that the water being a conduit to sort of, giving power or something to like a residual thing. Like maybe they were happy there. Maybe Pokey go to bed was, like a memory that was fine to
Yeah,
play over and over again.
yeah.
And even they had told this story about the EVP where it was, "You liar, you kissed her." They had implied that, as the historians had found somewhere in history, that one of the ship captains might have had hanky panky with someone else. Is that
Well,
true?
I don't know that any of the ship captains ever made it to Point Sur. They were on
Okay,
ships.
so one of the light stations, then
Yeah,
anybody there.
maybe.
So there isn't evidence that there was some kind of affair.
Not that I'm going to tell you about.
No, why?
Uh,
Why you have to tell me? Why you can't tell me?
because it was a gossipy rumor from 100 years ago, and I told the person that told me that. Well, I'll tell you the brief history. There was one of the head keepers was a dirty old man.
So it is definitely not far fetched that there would be an
Oh no,
EVP
no,
of a woman saying, "You're a liar,
yeah,
you kissed her."
yeah.
Wow. I honestly, out of all the EVPs, and I hear a lot of EVPs all the time, I feel like the ones that Julie got, like they were top notch.
Oh
Like
yeah,
so clear.
yeah, they are clear, and there's and I haven't heard what she's gotten in the last few years, but there was a whistle on one that's definitely a whistle, and her
The laughter.
yeah,
There's laughter.
yes, there was a laughter one, and she her friend who often does these investigations with her saw someone walking by in a uniform, and she sketched out the uniform for me, and it wasn't a uniform that was like a light keeper, so we don't really know. It looked like, I don't know if you're familiar with an Eisenhower jacket, but they're the short
Yeah.
jackets. It looked more like that. So was it some army guy there? We don't know a lot of what went on up there during World War II. We know they kept the light going, but I mean, there's.
Were there any light keepers there during
Oh
World War
yeah,
II?
yeah. They had they had both the light keepers with their families, and then they had some Navy people up there doing experiments. So they were
Oh.
actually partially developed radar, At Point Sur, they partially developed the sound surveillance system, SOSUS, which morphed into whatever they're using today to listen underwater. They were used that in the Cold War to listen for submarines. So we don't know much about what the Navy was doing up there because it was super secret.
Right.
And we just don't know. So maybe there were some Army people. We just don't know.
So interesting. It's not a tragic site. It's not where something catastrophic happened,
Right.
but it did have a lot of life there.
Oh, there was a lot of, yeah. I mean, some of these keepers had 4 or 5 kids.
Right.
So there were a lot of kids. During World War II, there were a lot of people. So it was kind of a busy place. Not everybody got along, you know.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, it's like a theater where it's high intense emotion sometimes.
Yes.
You know, like you don't get along with people or whatever. All of those things can leave its mark on a land or a building.
I guess. This is one of those things, you know, I'm the historian and I just go, I don't know. I just don't know.
Let me look it up.
Yeah, well,
let me see what I can find.
I'll know when I get there.
It looks like an amazing place. Now, if you're saying that Julie does ghost investigations, is that something that people can go on?
Yes, she, when she has the time, because she works, she arranges what we call ghost hunts. And it was $50 a person. I'm not sure if that's still what's being charged. She's a volunteer, so the money stays at Point Sur for our restoration, and she takes up to, I think, 10 or 12 people, and she shows them how to do an investigation. Often they're small groups, so she does it, I don't want to say on demand, but it's not like she does it once a month. She arranges with people to do it. So, and there's probably a minimum charge. You know, if there aren't 12 people, maybe I just don't know. But I'm sure there's.
How would people find out? Do we follow?
They send.
Is there
send an email?
Instagram.
They just send an email, and I answer that, and then I send it on to Julie. We kind of with COVID and everything, the lighthouse was actually light station was closed the year before COVID because they were doing bridge repairs, and then of course we were closed a lot during COVID, and now this summer they're doing more bridge repairs, which we hope will be finished in the fall. So the bridge repairs, they really don't want us going up at night or during the week, so we're pretty much stuck with Sunday afternoons for extra tours.
Okay, but you're not doing anything special for October for Halloween or anything?
We have Halloween tours the last 2 Saturdays of October, and they're not paranormal. They're kind of hokey. So we threw some Halloween-y stuff in it. We've got a haunted house. Julie is there. She does, she lets people listen to her recordings and she tells them about how she does stuff. So in addition to the haunted house with some special effects, hokey is the operative word here, we also have Julie in one of our historic houses will sit with people for 15-20 minutes in groups and tell them about what she does and what she's gotten. So
well, if you hear back from Julie, I would love to talk to her more about her EVPs.
She's much more cognizant of what is up there, but we've had other things. We've had one volunteer that has twice seen someone in our head keeper's house. She was
the same person keeps seeing
something? She saw a woman in a long skirt on the stairs, and then she was sitting in the same building and looked outside and saw a man, and I can't remember what she said the man was wearing, but she thought it was somebody. It was maybe a uniform or a brown kind of suit or something, but she thought it was somebody from the tour. She was waiting for the tour to come up, and it wasn't. It, yeah,
wow.
and we had a report of when back in the 80s that after the light station had closed, so the Coast Guard left in 72, California State Parks acquired it in 84, and then they started giving tours in 89. And somewhere in the late 80s, a young girl saw a man in uniform that nobody else saw. And we had kind of gotten it wrong. We had conflated it with some other events, but somebody gave me her name, and she was visiting her parents in Big Sur. And I called her probably 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And she, in her 30s at this point, and she said that she was up there after it had closed, but just when state parks had taken over. And she was with a friend whose father was a ranger, and they were looking in the buildings, and they looked, like, pieces of paper and the odd piece of furniture here and there. And she went out one building, and she said she looked across, and she wasn't sure what building it was. And she saw a man in the doorway of another building in uniform. And he smiled at her, and she didn't think much of it because she was with a ranger, and she was 10. She didn't know, uniform's a uniform. But later on, when she met up with the rest of the group, there was no one in that uniform. And she described a lightkeeper uniform, like a navy blue.
Oh, so she got the uniform exactly the way it was.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
Yes.
they tell me that children are more open to these things than
Right.
adults.
That's the thought.
Yeah. So I don't know, but she remembered it 20 years later.
Well, and I still have the theory that a lot of it is residual, is not necessarily an active hunting, but maybe that light station wasn't a bad place to be. Maybe these imprints are not. I mean, are you ever afraid there?
When I'm in those buildings alone, especially at night, it's spooky.
Okay.
It's just plain out spooky.
Just gonna throw my theory right out the window.
Well, I don't know. I've had very little things that I can't explain in my life. A few, but I just don't know. But we know.
But it's a creepy feeling.
Yeah, my daughter, when she was 4, had an experience on the USS Constellation, an old ship in Baltimore Harbor, and she didn't know till she was 15 that she was the only one that saw this person. So I don't discount it, but aside from looking over my shoulder, I haven't heard footsteps, which a lot of the other volunteers have heard. If they're up there,
Right.
If they're up there kind of alone. We had several of the state parks people have heard footsteps in the buildings when they've been in them alone. Some of the volunteers have. We had one of the buildings was being worked on, and a contractor got up there before everybody else, and he decided to go into the building, and he turned the doorknob, and he couldn't turn it, and then it turned out of his grasp the other way from how he was turning it. So he just went back and sat in his truck until everybody else got there.
Yeah, I'm not going to go in there by myself. Never mind.
And that happened, one of our volunteers who's a total naysayer, she had a friend, and they were in one of the buildings, and my friend went to porta potties, and the visitor couldn't get out of that building until she couldn't turn the doorknob, and then as soon as the volunteer came around the corner, the doorknob opened.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So and this was with Julie, but we had a very long time ago, we had a group from San Jose come and they wanted to do an investigation. And it was the first one we had ever done. And we had a ranger up there, and there was one recording they got in the head keeper's house, which is a 2-story standalone house. And you can hear the recording of steps going up the stairs, and the stairs have a certain sound to them. It just, I could tell anywhere that was the sound of those steps. And you can hear the volunteer and the ranger chatting kind of in the background. And the first time I heard it, I said, "Who was that?" And the people who got the recording said, there was no one. And I asked the ranger, and I said, "Did you hear that?" She said, "I did. I almost wet my pants."
I love it. I would love to go up there. Hopefully I get to talk to Julie.
Yeah.
I would love to do, and I say this all the time, I'm not a great ghost investigator. I don't have the patience for it. And I love the stories.
Yes.
And I actually like this one because I like the nice stories, that there's nothing really frightening there. Like,
yeah,
with like ghost, all the TV shows are always trying to look for the demon or the negativity.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of a place that could still have residual there, that could still have interactive. Like, I think it would be so much fun to go up there and do an investigation. Maybe I can do like an event up there, like bring listeners and go up there and do an investigation or something. That would be amazing. Because I said I go to San Jose for work. I didn't even think about how close it was to San Jose. I know it's not a hop, a skip, and a jump, but it's definitely doable from San Jose.
And I just remembered I did have one experience. We were in the lighthouse, another volunteer and me, and we had cleaned the lighthouse and the bottom floor, and there was a demonstration light in there that used to rotate. And because nobody took care of it, it hadn't rotated in probably 2-3 years. And as we were getting ready to go, gathering up our brooms and whatnot, the light made one rotation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we thought, oh, somebody must like what we're doing.
So you wouldn't call yourself a naysayer?
No,
you're open to it.
I have no idea. I have no idea. I think I'm not particularly open, but I'm not a naysayer.
Okay. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
Point Sur Light Station is a place where the past and present converge, where history and mystery intertwine with its whispers of ghostly tales and voices from the beyond. Be sure to tune in next week to hear some of those voices. Thank you for listening to this episode of Haunting History Podcast. We love hearing from you, so be sure to like, follow, and comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Haunting History Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to all your favorites.
Visit our website at hauntinghistorypodcast.com for more information on each episode, links to our Patreon page, and all of our social media platforms.
Until next time, I'm Kat.
I'm Haley.
Remember, the living are far scarier than any ghost.